Welcome to Transformative Principal, where we interview real principals who are doing amazing things to help our students every single day. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Good. So why don't you start by telling us who you are and how you got to where you are. You know, you don't have to give your whole life history, but just a short description of your career so far.
Well, I'm Tom Whitford. I'm the lead learner of a actually, I should say I'm a lead learner of 3 buildings right now here in the Tacoma School District. I have a K-5 building. Yeah, I have a K-5 building in town, and then a K-2 building and a 3-5 building. One's 7 miles down the road, and the other one's about 14 miles down the road. So 3 buildings definitely keeps you on my toes. That's a first, having multiple buildings for me like that. I got into education, oh boy, I can't even remember how many years ago now, about 16 years ago. Started off as a physical education teacher. Actually, I started off as a health teacher and moved into a physical education position the next year. And I did that for about 7 years. When I had the opportunity, or I should say, I met a mentor that convinced me that I should think about administration. Funny enough, at the same time, my high school principal called me up and said that they had a cohort opening at a university in Wisconsin, and they'd like me to be part of that first group if I was interested in administration. So I was like, well, stars are aligning. It must be time to give it a shot, because I really hadn't considered it. But after going through just a few classes with the cohort group, I could tell it was something that I was really interested in. The leadership piece, being able to affect a greater change than I could just in my classroom, even though as PE teacher I got to work with every kid in the school. Was being able to work with kids at a different level, and the opportunity to work with adults. So I decided it was something I would give a try, and I did 1 year as an assistant to the principal kind of position, where you get to be a PE teacher for 3 classes, and the rest of the day you're dealing with discipline and all the other fun things you learn as an assistant principal. And then from the opportunity there, I had to move. It was called an assistant principal's position, but I was actually the only administrator in the building. I think it was a way for the district to save some money. But it was a great experience I had there. I had a K-2 building in Northeast Illinois for a while in the Winthrop Harbor School District. And after doing that for 4 years, I said, okay, it's time to try to put on the principal's hat. And I had the opportunity to move back to Wisconsin, near my hometown, and worked in a great district there for 4 years, and then I wanted the opportunity to try a bigger building, take on a little bit more. It was a great small school that I had in the Dodgeville School District, and we ended up winning the Blue Ribbon Award for having improved test scores for 4 years in a row, and that was a great experience. I had a great little staff there. Our big focus there was really on professional learning communities, and greatly enjoyed working with them and building our RTI program and PBIS program there. But again, after 4 years, I was just looking for a bigger building and a bigger challenge, and it wasn't going to happen in that district. The principal that was there before me had been in the district for quite a while, and she was pretty secure staying in her position. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to hunt. But I've had a great opportunity since then, and I'm really loving the district I'm with right now up in Toma.
That's great. So there are a couple of things I want to pull out of what you talked about. Tell me about your mentor that told you to apply. Who was that mentor, and why did you feel like what they were saying was the right thing to do?
My mentor was Colleen Packett. She was the elementary principal that had just come into the Gurnee School District when I was down in Illinois, and she asked me if I wanted to be on the school improvement planning team. And I said, sure. And I didn't know what I was going to do in that role, really, as the PE teacher to help out with that. But it ended up being some great opportunities that created some culture surveys for students and for staff, and really got to start to look at student data and analyze that and say, okay, from there, how can we create a school improvement plan to move us along and make us better? So that was a really interesting process. And after going through that, she just said, you seem like you're on top of all this stuff. I would encourage you to think about administration. And she was a great leader. I really respected her. She brought professional book reads in to the staff. So we started to read a common book together as a staff. We did a lot of article studies where we'd read 2 or 3 articles about a related subject and then have conversations as a staff. And I really started to see the benefits of what we could do with professional development. I think things have evolved a little bit since then too, but it really opened my eyes to that, because before that, our professional development was really kind of the district was focused on reading. So we all talked about reading scores, what's a new reading program we could do. And as a PE teacher, I was just like, where does this relate to me at all? And this new mentor came in and she said, no, specials folks will go over and focus on what they need to focus on. Reading teachers will go focus on this. So she really started to move towards a personalized professional development a little bit more. And it was great. But there were some things that were cultural that we did as a whole too. So she really kind of pushed me towards it. And then like I said, the opportunity opened up for that cohort with my high school principal and a couple other superintendents from my hometown area that I knew. And I was like, I respect all of them to learn that job from them. So it just seemed like the timing was right.
So what I like about that is you're starting to talk about the next question that I want to ask you, which is about professional learning communities. Describe what your ideal professional learning excuse me, what your ideal professional learning community looks like, and how you would teach another principal to implement that professional learning community.
The biggest thing, I learned all my PLC work from Dufour's work in the Solution Tree group. And I've really tried to model what I do after them. I had the opportunity when I came to Dodgeville in Wisconsin here. They were just starting to move towards a professional learning community belief system and things like that as well. And so I also happen to have some connections from Adlai Stevenson High School down there in Illinois, where Dufour started his work.
Right, yeah.
And so I set up opportunities for us to do some site visits down there. We actually took 3 groups down. The whole district did a book study of the Whatever It Takes book, their first book on PLCs, and it was just a great opportunity. Everybody was on board with the ideas, and I don't know how you don't, if you read the book, I don't know how you don't say, yes, this is like a good thing. So after doing those site visits and having some great conversations, the monthly study work and stuff like that, it really became an idea that we decided we need to move the culture of our building that way. And that was probably one of the most exciting pieces is that it wasn't just a program or something like that you followed or that you purchased and you said, okay, here's step 1, step 2. It was a philosophy change. And so we had to have lots of conversations and bring together not only just the leadership team that I started to put together too, but the whole staff together as well, and say, how do we move forward from here? How are we going to do things so that we become more about learning than just teaching, or that we become more about student learning than just test scores, or here's the programs that we have, now how do we do those? So it really promoted some excellent conversations. I was also fortunate to have a staff that was hungry to move forward and do some improving and try some new things. So we did some fantastic work there. It was great 4 years of incredible conversations and really examining what we do. And I was so impressed by the staff, because they were, when we had disagreements or arguments, it wasn't personal. It was like really focused in on playing the devil's advocate of, okay, if we change this, what's going to be some of the fallout? What are some things like that? And no one really personalized it. We all looked at it really professionally. So it was incredible.
That is awesome. How do you have that conversation where you start getting people to want to get in a book study and talk about what they're learning? What kinds of things do you do to set that up so that it can be successful with the teachers you have?
Well, one of the most powerful things that I learned from Dufour and Eaker and the whole group of Solution Tree PLC folks there was that the power of change really comes from stories. Data can help you drive a lot of decisions and makes things easier to see, but it doesn't usually motivate people. But stories motivate people. And when you learn to share a powerful story, people see what a difference it can make. And so that becomes a huge piece there, is learning how to share some of those stories and share some of the stories that we have right there in our own building. Yes, stories from other places are great too, but when you can personalize those stories so that they can see how it's made a difference to a kid right here, that can really change people's minds there. So that's a huge piece to being able to do that, is to share some of those stories that we have going on right here in our own buildings. Create some opportunities, just some opportunities for conversation. That's pretty powerful for folks too, especially if they've been kind of behind closed doors or living in their little silos for a while. Being able to have some conversations with a wider group, and as a leader, being able to just sit and listen and let the stories come out can be really powerful for staff, because some of them have never had that opportunity before. Some leaders kind of squelch that thing, and they want to be the only voice, and it's really powerful to let the voices come from them.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of your tips for helping administrators start to share those stories with teachers so that they can feel, well, how can administrators tell stories? And then I have a follow-up question to that also.
State your question one more time, because I want to make sure I have it right in my head.
No problem. What I want to know is how can an administrator who's listening start to tell the stories to get his teachers or her teachers to want to change and do new things? What are some tips for good storytelling?
Well, the best tips for good storytelling are making them true stories, and try to use the stories that are closest to you. So again, by providing opportunities, and that's the biggest thing, is finding time to have this storytelling time. Don't have your staff meetings where you're sitting there running through the list of all the housekeeping things that you have to do. Provide time for real conversation. And sometimes an easy way to start that conversation is by bringing data into it. Obviously, it helps focus the conversation. But if there's also new initiatives and things like that are taking place, that's a time for conversation. To me, if we're doing something, even if the decision's been made by someone beyond us, that this is what we're going to do for a new initiative, there is no reason that we shouldn't come together and beat that up a little bit. There is no reason that you shouldn't take an idea and say, okay, what are the pros and cons? What things are we going to need to do to make this work? And what are some things that we may do that will be stumbling blocks for us? And how can we avoid those maybe? Because if we just decide to muddle through, pro or con, like it or not, all that stuff gets left behind closed doors, and people start to do everything their own way instead of having some group think together and say, okay, what are some pros and cons? How can we approach this? What's the best practice? And work some of that out ahead of time. Yeah. And then, obviously, we need to meet up again after we've done it for a bit and say, how's it going? Because, again, there's good practices by some, bad practices by some, and we need to be able to examine that and say, okay, what's working, what's not working, what can we change? I think when you start to get and talk and show folks about the continuous improvement model, it starts to get in there. Nobody wants to be worse or to stay in a rut that they're in either. But sometimes it gets hard to identify that you're in that rut or that you're not being that successful. And so the opportunity to come together and examine practices and data and have some conversations is what starts to open the door and go, oh, I never thought about doing it like that, things like that too. So
yeah, that's pretty powerful. The finding time thing is always a difficult thing in education. You want to, give teachers opportunities to plan and respect their contract time, but carving time out to make sure that you're talking about things, that is so important. And I'm reiterating that because you're actually doing that, it sounds like, and that is something that we should all be doing to make sure that our teachers are getting the best opportunities they can.
Well, this year we've been mostly trying to do it through our staff faculty meeting times. But we want to try to find a way to up that time and improve some of that conversation, because a lot of our faculty meeting time is locked into conversations that we have to have, like district initiatives and things like that. But we want to try to find a way to move that time, increase that time. And I've gotten some great ideas from leaders like Jay Posick, Joe Sanfilippo. They've created Matt Renwick up there in Wisconsin Rapids too. They've created times like once a week. They'll have I think Matt Redmond calls it Jumpstart Fridays. And on Jumpstart, some of the aides and the support staff folks and things like that will come down and work with kids so the teachers can have 30 minutes, 45 minutes to go and do some of that collab time. I think they do theirs on Friday mornings or something like that, so they call it Jumpstart Fridays. We do a rotation schedule, so a set day isn't going to work for us, but it might be A day or B day that we decide to do it, and have that time set aside so that 30 minutes each week, teachers have a chance to get together, and maybe they do their book chat then, or maybe that's when they're going to do their grade level data analysis time, so that the other times that they have to meet during the day can be for other things. But I think it's important that we try to find that time and carve that time out that is theirs to work and grow.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. How do you get teachers to feel comfortable sharing their stories with you and with their fellow teachers? I know for teachers it's difficult to sometimes think that if I tell what I'm doing, then I'm putting myself out there and bragging too much, or if I say that I'm doing this, then I'm putting another teacher down. How do you get them comfortable to share what they're doing that's successful?
Well, one of the things that I try to do when I first come into a building or a district is get a good read on the building's culture as far as trust, because I think creating a culture of trust is a huge thing. And one of the things, and I mean, I think I sensed that all along, but when I read Covey's book, The Speed of Trust, it really brought it home for me of how important that is and how effective that can be in changing the speed at which your culture can move. Because you think it's something that takes years of time and all this thing that it really takes, and it takes a lot of soft skill time instead of focusing on some of the hard skills. Well, I think trust is a hard skill. I think it's a critical, important skill, and until you have that culture in your building, a lot of those conversations won't take place. And I think it even affects kids. So that's one of the things I try to find out right away. If we have that, or if we're working towards that already, and they have a pretty good sense of it, I think the big thing then is for them to show that I'm a trust guy too. That's important to me, the relationship piece, but also that hey, I make mistakes, and we don't get better unless we can talk about the mistakes we make. And for me to be able to admit the mistakes I make and things like that is huge for them, because it lets them know that we're all human and we all make mistakes, and actually mistakes are where we learn. So don't be afraid of them. Let's hash them out and figure out what we can do to move forward from our mistakes.
Yeah, and your last blog post called Learning with Your Mistakes on March 30th, I thought was just awesome, because you really exemplified that.
I'm glad you thought it was awesome. It was hard for me to swallow, but
I believe it. I mean, that is a perfect example of somebody doing something that they think is right and good, and then recognizing that it's causing more stress. And just to let people know who may not have seen it, I'll put a link to it in the show notes, but was that you were starting to try and provide an incentive for people to read the emails that you were sending out and making it a fun thing for them to do. So if they sent you an email with the word surprise in it, or if they came up to you and said surprise or something, then they would get a treat or something, and they took it as you were trying to manipulate them or trick them into reading the email and see who was doing their homework or not.
Yeah.
And that was it was just great. So talk a little bit more about how you realized that, and how I saw how you addressed the internet with it on your blog post, but how did you address that with your faculty too? Because that's a really key thing that people can learn.
It was a huge piece, and I think it was a trust building piece too. But what it was, and what made me feel good, was a teacher felt they could trust me to come in and have that conversation.
Yeah, huge.
I was totally doing it just to add some fun to it. It's that time of year when people are starting to get a touch burnt out and stuff like that, and so I want to make sure that it's still fired up about our professional learning and stuff like that. And the blog posts, the videos, and the graphics that I include in my weekly update that I send out my staff are purely personal growth. When you get the chance, check these things out, reflect on them, things like that. I have no checkup system on them or anything like that. I just put them out there to share because I thought they were really good pieces, or they might be reflecting or be linked to something that we're kind of discussing and talking about right now in our building. So anyway, yeah, I shared those out with staff, and I put some things in there that if you read this far in here, email me back with the word surprise, and I put on one of those little chocolate rochers in their mailbox, just as a treat. And one of those, I hate to use the word incentive because that really wasn't it. It was just supposed to be kind of a fun thing. And then the following week, I followed it up with George Kuros had a great blog post that kind of dealt with something that we were talking about in our building and a belief that I have too. And I wanted to make sure that I put something in this comment section there. And I just made a really vague note to make sure you check out the comments of this blog post here. And in the comment section, I said, hey, if you found this, come in and see me, and I'll give you a coupon for a free scoop of ice cream out at the Culver's ice cream place. And then I had a teacher come into me, and she goes, I worked and worked, and I finally found it, and I was up all night trying to find that thing. And as she's saying that, it's clicking in my head right then. I'm like, I created a monster here. And she said, I just want you to know, I know you think you're doing this for something fun, but it feels like a checkup. It feels like a way for us to check in and say, are we doing our homework? And as soon as she said homework, I was like, ooh, that's not it at all. This was never meant to be homework. I'm not a big, strong, huge believer in homework. And right there, I was like, okay, I bombed. I made a mistake here. It was never meant to be that. I'm sorry. I will end this practice because I put that out there just for you folks to have some resources. Instead of you have to run and dig for everything, I'm putting it out there for you, so it's right there. Never meant it to be that. And that was kind of the end of the conversation right there. But as I reflected on it more throughout that day, I was just like, that really left a bad taste in my mouth. And so I went down and met with her after school, and just had a heart-to-heart with her that I never intended it to go there. I do not want it to be that kind of thing. And I said, we won't do that again. And I told her what my intent was and everything like that. And she said she understood, but she was also that point in the year when teachers are feeling a little fried, and we have multiple initiatives coming down at us right now.
Yep.
And it was overwhelming to her. And I was just like, I don't want to be that. So thank you for bringing this to my attention. I didn't even think about that. And it was a time for me to step back and go, I forgot to walk in somebody else's shoes for a while and really think about all that I do. When, as Covey likes to say, also seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Yeah.
So it was a good learning moment for me, and I had to choke it down and say mistake.
Yeah, that's great. Did you talk to the rest of your staff about that, or was it just that one teacher, or did you just stop doing it?
I sent it out actually in the next week's weekly update. I sent a little blurb out about that and said, won't be going there again. It was never my intent. And I've talked to a few of them face to face about it too. Some of the building leaders, I wanted to make sure they understood and stuff like that. And they said, I never saw it that way. And I go, it doesn't matter. Some people did. And I am not going there. So I'm pulling that out. Yeah. Like I said, I talked with some of the other folks, sent out the blurb and the update, and it really hasn't been an issue since. So that was good.
That's good.
I still try to make sure, because the first thing I thought was I'm going to put a lot less in there, because if they're feeling like it's homework. But I decided, no, I don't want to cut back on all the great resources and things I have. I don't care if they read them a month from now or right now or not. I want to make sure that they have access to some great things that sometimes not every teacher is connected as I am. Right. And so I still put all that stuff in there, but I let them know it's on your own time and your own pace, and I'm not going to remotely check if you've looked into it or read it or not.
Yeah. One thing when I interviewed Melinda Miller, who's a great principal in Missouri, she said that one of her pieces of advice was, don't stop pushing for more of whatever it is that you're passionate about just because people are feeling overwhelmed, because there's always going to be somebody who's overwhelmed. And there are people who will love those weekly updates, and there are people who will probably hate them and never want to read them. And as long as you're okay with that wide range of responses, then that's fine. And sending that out and just helping people is really awesome and really the right thing to do. Thank you so much for downloading and listening to this podcast. Please subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher, and please feel free to give us a rating on Stitcher Radio or on iTunes so that we can help spread the word about how much we're learning in this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Jethro Jones.